Thank you for the kind introduction, and you laid out the landscape for us in terms of the overall pricing. This is a terrific panel. In fact, the panel is so good, I really don't need to introduce them by title. How's that? Former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, Special Climate Representative, of course, Lord Adair Turner with the Energy Transitions Commission in the UK, but former chair of the Financial Services Authority, Rachel Kyte, who leads the Climate Committee for the United Kingdom as well, and His Highness, the Director General of ARENA. I say that because you're a hometown favorite, Francesco La Camera from ARENA. Can we give them a warm welcome here to the stage? Thank you very much. Just want to remind the panel that we have 30 minutes divided by 4. So I'm going to I want to really get through 2 clear interventions here. So try to give me 2.5, 3 minutes max per round. And they're not simple questions, because the math indicates we had a record, Secretary Kerry, last year of investment of $570 billion. That's the good news, right, if you will. The bad news, and you know these numbers extremely well, the target's $1.5 trillion, and 90% of that funding is going to the OECD countries, which is the challenge as well. For example, Africa is getting 1%. So the multi-trillion-dollar question here is, how do you see the state of the global energy transition? And everybody wants to know, will it be derailed by Trump 2.0, because he's not a big fan of the UN structure or giving more money to the World Bank, or a believer in climate change despite what's facing us? Take it on.
Well, first of all, thank you to the UAE for putting this on and for reintroducing the word sustainability into actions which are anything but. I think it's fair to say, I think it's important for us to have a good starting point here. For 36 years, we have been sort of loosely organizing ourselves through 29 COPs and a whole bunch of negotiations and a whole bunch of talk. We are making amazing progress. We are doing incredible things. And there are so many different technologies that are beginning to sort of build up and come online that you have to be excited about that, but you also have to be realistic in making clear to people that it's not enough, it's not fast enough. I think the amount of money that we've been sort of talking about actually is about at 1.8 trillion in venture capital, in investing in all energy sectors and transitional issues. And that's an improvement. It was for the first time in human history, twice as much money as was invested in fossil fuel. Absolutely. So there's a shift. And the price of oil went down regularly while demand for energy went up. And so we're looking at a very important moment in this journey where we have got to understand that the targets that have come out of global negotiations and countless scientific papers do not reflect anybody's ideology. They don't reflect politics. They don't have a liberal conservative label to them. It is science. And we forget that. It is science based on mathematics, physics, some biology, and some chemistry. And we've been hearing the same warnings since 1988, when Jim Hansen first sort of in the modern era said, this is happening, you all better watch out. Well, even though we're making this progress, even though we're investing, we are seeing Mother Nature tell us on a regular basis that we're not doing enough. Now, I'm not going to sit here and be an expert on what, whether it was a electric line or a spark that caused what happened in California, but the drought is part of the global change in climate. The drought itself, the dryness, the lack of water, other kinds of things. So we have to begin to recenter ourselves on how we are going to accelerate the transition. In the UAE, last year, we came to, I think, the strongest of all the convention, the conference of the parties, all of the COPs, and I was at day 1 in Rio and many in between. That was by far the most dramatic and important statement that has been made, which is, I repeat it, we must transition away from fossil fuel so as to achieve net zero by 2050. And I'm now believing we're far enough along, you better start to question the net part of that. You got to get real reductions. We have to do it accelerating in this decade, which is really important language, according to the
target
science.
is 3 times tripling renewables, as you know, and reducing
tripling
emissions.
renewables, tripling nuclear, and doubling efficiency.
Those are hard numbers to hit, as you know.
They are hard numbers to hit, and they're being made harder right now by casual indifference in many parts of the world by many parties that have the ability to make different decisions, but it's business as usual in too many places. So we have to decide, either we are serious. I mean, why are we all here? Why are we talking about all these new technologies? Why are people individually pushing towards these goals? Because we know that if you don't meet those goals, it's catastrophic. And yet, we're not bringing to scale even the current technology. There are many experts out there who tell me that if we just deployed more of the existing technology of renewable that we have today, and we brought a few other things online in these next few years, we could meet the goal of a 50 to 52% reduction by 2030. That's what we're supposed to do. What's the word? I'm frustrated and to some degree angry that we're sitting here, even though a lot is happening, and I don't want to diminish that.
No, of course.
But it's just not going to meet the goal, and our job is to meet the goal.
Great, thanks very much. Lord Turner, it's great to have you. I knew you from covering the Financial Services Authority during the global financial crisis. This is another crisis, and I think if you can outline what the Energy Transitions Commission's goal is here, and I think it's worth saying, if there is resistance, what are the political realities, and how do we tilt it where that money needs to be deployed, because climate doesn't know any boundaries. If Africa is getting 1.5% of the total investment, we have a problem, right? Because you can't have, especially with AI adoption, multiple speed transitions taking place. Please.
Well, at the Energy Transition Commission, what we do is we analyze the techno-economics of how to get the whole world to net zero. And I agree with Secretary Kerry, there's an issue about what we mean by net, but something like zero by 2050. And then we argue for the policies, the actions, the international commitments that can take us in that direction. And if I had to characterize how we see the world today, it's politics bad, technologies fantastic. I think we have to be clear that the political trend is adverse. I don't think one can deny that the election of Donald Trump as the next president of the US is bad for the prospects for containing climate change. The fact that there will be a pullback of America from its domestic commitments and also from its international engagement, which Secretary Kerry played such a hugely important part in over many years, this is bad for the global climate transition. And it's not just in America. In Europe, there's a lot of populist far-right movements now challenging our commitments to get to net zero, and in particular challenging any idea that we should help the rest of the world get there. I think we have to be clear that some of what was agreed at Baku on climate finance is a bit of a fantasy land. I mean, if you think that the rich developed world is going to put its hands in its pockets for large amounts of grant finance rather than just, private finance for a return, I'm afraid that world is disappearing. I wish it wasn't, but the politics are very much against that. So the politics are adverse. The technologies are amazing. Solar PV has come down in price in the last 50 years by 99.9%, and it is going to go on falling, and it is going to go on having higher and higher yields. The other technology which is extraordinary, and you ain't seen nothing yet, is batteries. Battery costs are down something like 50% in the last 2 years. Huge breakthroughs occurring in multiple new sorts of new battery chemistry, which will give us higher energy density or much lower cost, for instance, with sodium batteries. And that means that the electric vehicle revolution is absolutely unstoppable. Norway this year will be 100% electric vehicle purchases. China is over 50%, it'll probably be 55% this year. It's just a matter of time before that happens across the world. But equally important, batteries as a storage device is transformational. Right. Solar plus batteries in much of the world, in the sunny parts of the world where most of the renewables will come from solar, solar plus batteries is going to be the killer app of the renewables, of the energy transition, and it will be the cheapest way to produce round-the-clock electricity in most parts of the world. Round-the-clock electricity. Electricity, 100% of hours in the year.
Okay, let's park it there.
The crucial thing we've got to do is how do we unleash that investment? How do we take that technological possibility? And it's not primarily about grants or concessions. It's about seizing an investment opportunity which is there. It's about mobilizing capital, and that's what we've got to go focus on. And that's why this part of the world, Middle East, is hugely important, because it can be a huge mobilizer of capital, including, for instance, into places like Africa, which are sitting on the most enormous opportunity, essentially to skip the fossil fuel generation and go almost immediately to a deeply electrified, deeply renewable system.
Okay. Yeah, it was $85 billion into battery storage, so there's a business-based case because the money's finding a home, so I'm glad you brought it up. Professor Kyte, it's good to see you again. Two things here. The UK is very dedicated to net zero, and you wanted to focus on this idea of how do we deploy money, picking up on Lord Turner's comments here, to the places who need it the most. And I would imagine the UK wants to raise investment money for its own transition at the same time. What is realistic? Because we had a heck of a fight in Baku about the loss and damage fund with aspirations to $1.3 trillion. We settled on something that was less than 1/4 of that. Professor?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the UAE for really quite splendid opening this morning. And the fact that we're all here is testament to the fact that this transition is underway. The only thing that's in doubt, no matter who's getting elected where, is the speed of the transition and whether or not we bring everybody along with it in a way that is fair and just. So what does that mean for a new UK government? Well, we published on the 13th of December our global, our domestic transition plan for 2030, the law that will take us to that point. Because while we have a net zero commitment for 2050, we have a very ambitious plan for the net zero energy system of the UK by 2030. So we'll be at almost 100% net zero at that point. And what that means is that we will mobilize our own domestic investment and attract more international investment into the fact that we have that kind of ambition, that we have a lot of the pieces in place that we need to manage in an integrated way, that energy transition. And there are things that we know that we need to improve. I think that the last panel started talking about some of that. So yeah, it takes too long to bring renewables onto the grid at the moment, but a lot of that is addressed in the new law and the new act, and then that's going to drive action over the next 4 to 5 years. Why are we doing that? Well, we have an obligation to get to net zero, but more importantly, we want to be an energy secure economy. We also want to be one of the economies that wins by manufacturing and exporting our know-how in how to do this in a world where everybody is trying to do it. And if we only account for 1% of the emissions of the world, the security, energy security, and the well-being and the prosperity of British people depends on us engaging with the rest of the world, so that the rest of the world is moving at the speed of the UAE, the speed of the UK towards this energy transition. So it makes complete sense to engage with the rest of the world in helping this transition move more smoothly. And one of the places where we engage is on the finance. So there is the question of mobilizing the finance, which becomes a large preoccupation in climate negotiations. But finance will flow to where it can make a decent return. And so one of the things that we see, and we see the Brazilians who will host the next COP focusing on this, is an improvement in the planning and the permitting that is needed for the transition to move more quickly. That we have better utility structures, so we've got better laws and regulations around utilities that can then help countries move towards this energy transition, that we attack the obstacles and the blockages in interconnections to make sure that we can bring renewable energy through grids around the world, that we attack the blockages in the way in which our grids are operating, and that we take the know-how of how it's working and how we're learning, and we deploy that more efficiently. And in a country which has made so much advance on AI, and we, on Monday of this, what day? It's Tuesday today, right? So on Monday of this week, our Prime Minister announced a very aggressive plan for AI in the UK, that we use AI not only to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the management of the demand, that we find ways to really, as Bernard was saying on the last panel, without putting enormous amounts of money back into the system, that fine-tune it to go faster, but we can use AI to help the new distributed renewable energy technologies at a much cheaper price, reach all of those people who don't have energy. So for us, it's about delivering our commitment to the British people, which is the reason why this government was elected, and it's the international engagement around that agenda, because this only works for us if it works for everyone, and a belief that it isn't going to cost. We focus in climate negotiations on the cost of things. Outside of climate negotiations, we concentrate on the value of things from an investment perspective. We believe that we can achieve this transition, obviously with smart investment, but with a system that values technology, that technology can actually advance the reach into people's lives. And so for us, there may be storm clouds gathering, your question to Lord Turner, but those storm clouds will pass, because the point on the horizon to which we're all focused hasn't changed. The science hasn't changed. And the winners are going to be the countries that can manage their way through that transition more quickly than others. And we want to be a trusted partner in that process.
Okay, very good. You brought up AI, which is also going to take up a lot more energy, up to 20 to 30% by the end of the decade if we deploy very quickly. Let me just bring in the Director General here, and then we'll circle back, and then we have 6 minutes between the four of you, because nobody followed the 2.5-minute rule, so don't blame me. Francesco, two key topics here you wanted to address. One is what Rachel brought up, and that is, how do you make sure that there's information sharing and technology transfer to the global south so we don't have an unjust energy transition? How do you use international cooperation? I know there's programs in ARENA to accelerate that so they have access to the latest technologies, and there's not barriers to Chinese technologies going to Africa, Southeast Asia, and to LATAM. Please.
So naturally, as ARENA, we have our program of cooperation. I think in some way, the most important initiative is the one that we launched for Africa, the Accelerated Partnership for Renewable Energy in Africa, under the leadership of President Ruto. We launched the occasion of the Africa Summit, September 2023. We had 7 African countries with us, and as partners, we had from the beginning the UAE, we have Germany, Denmark, and the United States of America. And this initiative is really attracting a lot of interest. From 7 countries, we reached now 11 countries, African countries. And during the General Assembly in the last 2 days, we have received interest of other 2 countries to come. I think that shortly will be overcome 15, perhaps more, African countries. Also from the donor side, we have received the interest of Japan. So now we are becoming quite consistent. We have a pipeline of projects already that is invested every year in Africa on renewable projects. We are working for the plan for this country. We are organizing investment forum. This means that in Nairobi last October, I think, I had for the time the impression that we are making the difference in that continent. And we will continue to work in Africa. But naturally, we know that Africa and Southeast Asia are key. The Paris Agreement is at stake in these 2 regions of the world. This means that we have to work in Africa, we have to work in Southeast Asia. This means that we are discussing with the Singaporean authority to launch a similar initiative of APRA for Southeast Asia, as we did with Azerbaijan for ASEAN region. We will have an investment forum also for Southeast Asia in the third quarter of the next year. And this is the reason we are discussing with the Brazil COP 2030 presidency. We will launch under the leadership of President Ruto an initiative for Latin America. We will have a first investment forum in 2026, first quarter in Brazil. So what ARENA is trying to do to make things happening in this continent. It's not easy, but we are trying.
Good. I know, Lord Turner, you wanted to pick up on Africa, and then I wanted to talk about the private sector and your initiative, Secretary Kerry. Lord Turner, Africa is a case study because there is the solar potential. I get a little bit frustrated because ESG principles sometimes hold back investment because of the governance in Africa, as it's seen. Interest rates are super high. The credit risk is not covered. Can you do that in a minute? I know we're tight on time, please.
Well, I can't remember whether it's IEA figures or it may be IRENA figures, but somebody's worked out that the solar potential...
You have to grab your handheld, Francesco, if you want to speak.
That the total solar PV output of Africa, if you wanted it, could credibly be over 1 million terawatt hours per annum, which is 10 times what I have ever seen as the most extreme scenario of all the electricity that the world will need in a completely decarbonized zero economy. So let's be clear. I know that the phrase is from IRENA. The solar resource of Africa is, for all intents and purposes, limitless. But up until about 3 years ago, total sub-Saharan African PV installations were less than the Netherlands. And I have to say, I do occasionally go to the Netherlands, and it's not the sunniest place in the world. The fundamental problem is about capital flow. It's about the cost of capital, because in a renewable system, all the cost, effectively all the cost, is the capital up front with almost zero operating costs. So what we've got to do, and we've got to take the extraordinary benefit of the fact that the cost of the technologies, both the solar and the batteries, are now collapsing. We've got to combine that with capital. That will mean combining Western capital, Middle Eastern capital, Chinese capital, with primarily, for now, Chinese technology. And I think we've got to be blunt that that's what it's going to be, and we shouldn't accept any limits to it. I don't think it would be right for anybody to try to say to an African country, you've got to buy anything other than the cheapest solar PV panels in the world, and the cheapest and best at the moment are coming from China.
Good. Thanks very much for the tightness of the answer as well. Very clear. Galvanized Climate Solutions, Secretary Kerry, is your new venture. You're co-chairing it. And I wanted to also address, and Francesco and Rachel, please jump in on this if you can. One of the arguments we always made is that renewables and wind can't be stable. We know the money that's going into battery storage. It doesn't provide the energy security. It doesn't meet the criteria of the trilemma. Where does your group work in this area to say renewables are a solution to the transition, and they can be reliable and they're cost effective?
Well, you cannot achieve the goal without renewables, but you also cannot achieve the goal without efficiency, without nuclear, without a series. I mean, most of the scientists in the world will tell you it's going to take some nuclear to be able to get to the targets we've set. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. And in that context, nobody, this fight we've had at all these COPs, which is appropriate, over what the developing world is getting, what the global south is getting. But nobody should kid themselves into believing that if all of a sudden we change that paradigm this year, next year, that's not going to save the climate crisis. Because 48 sub-Saharan African states equal 0.55% of all the emissions, all put together. So don't pretend, that's a development challenge. And it is appropriate for us to deal with the development challenge as a matter of equity, decency, and self-interest. Because 7 million people are dying every year now from the bad quality of air that travels around the world. Who gets the worst of it? The developing countries. Who gets the worst of sea level rise? Developing countries. Because they don't have the money to adapt, which is why adaptation is going to grow as a challenge here. But here's what we have
It
to
also
remember.
affects migration, which nobody wants to talk about.
Exactly. There are a great number of the people who've crossed the border in Mexico are coming because they can't live where they lived. They can't grow the food they used to grow. And we have something on the border of about 36 to 39 million refugees now already knocking on the doors of other countries. So look, the challenge here is about 25 countries. China's number one, US number two, Europe as a whole, and then individuals like Russia, Indonesia, Brazil. There's some core countries, folks, that are totaling over 80% of all the emissions. What is the climate crisis? It is a crisis of human beings choosing for their lights, their warmth, their transportation, to burn fossil fuels without capturing the emissions. Now, I'm not here to say no fossil fuel. Gas is part of the transition. We're going to do gas on an affordability issue, also practicality right now. But there's a point when you get to 2030 that gas is going to have to see its emissions captured. Because you can't just turn one problem into the new problem. So building out a 30-year infrastructure for a gas facility doesn't make sense unless you know what the lifespan is going to be and that you're going to be able to capture all those emissions. So look, as I said earlier, I'm actually optimistic. I'm optimistic because I see what real money is now starting to do. And it's starting to invest counterintuitively in some places in large renewable energy plants, in alternative technologies, et cetera. We are almost at the point where we can balance energy in various places, which are really moving fast, to use solar, to use wind, and to use another balance of whatever their options are. Germany is up around 50% renewable now. If you turn to those other 25 countries I just talked about, where are they on renewable? Single digits, tiny single digits. So think of the change it could make for the world if people take current technologies and understand that, you know, with respect, we're not here to crash gas or whatever it is. We're here to transition away. And most of the people I talk to at MIT or Stanford or Caltech, whatever, they're very doubtful we can bring to scale the level of capture we will need in the time frame we will need to be able to make it a success story. So yes, Vicky Holub at Occidental chasing direct air capture, terrific. Because if we're lucky enough to get to net zero by 2050, we then have to suck out of the atmosphere about 1.6 trillion tons of CO2, which is still going to do damage unless we get it right. So I want to see us come together in more of an international consortium. We ought to be putting more effort into small modular reactors. We ought to be putting much more effort in the deployment of renewable, get more supply chains in place. And right now, China, ladies and gentlemen, you know, a few years ago, we were pushing China, and I remember going to China in the middle of COVID, and China refused, said, no, we're not going to change. We have a goal. We're going to live with our goal. The last year when I left the job last year, China agreed to not only include all of their greenhouse gases in their national determined contribution, but also to put in place a national methane reduction plan. And today, China is producing and deploying more renewables than all of the rest of the world put together. So the challenge to the rest of us ought to be clear.
Okay, thanks very much. Rachel, I think it'd be inappropriate if I don't come back for a final word from you. You see the clock there. So where does the attention go then to make sure this is successful? I think, Secretary Kerry, you captured that with the 25 countries. It's really an interesting thought that should be the coalition of the willing and the fastest. How do you see it yourself, Rachel, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think if you look at the countries that are leading, the UAE, Brazil, the UK, obviously other countries are coming forward with their plans this year, then we have a responsibility to work together to bring political support behind those countries that have plans that are going to be more difficult to implement. So how do we help South Africa that is now moving to go even faster? How do we help Indonesia to move to go even faster? How do we align ourselves behind India's ambitions, right? So this is, this has been the way in which we've been working for a number of years, but we need to now sort of supercharge that. And certainly the UK, along with other countries, is prepared to do that. But we can only do that if we're listening. We can only do that if it's pragmatic. We can only do that if we're in for the long haul. And we can only do that if we do that at home as well. So there's no point saying do as we say. It's do as we do. And I think, coming in with a new government with an ambitious target, using the private sector, academia, organizations like ETC and others, we've got a lot to share. But there is a responsibility for leading countries to help other countries go the hard yards to make the transition work. And that's policy, regulation, getting the narrative right, explaining why this works, and then the finance.
Okay. 30 seconds, Francesco, with the handheld. Renewables provide energy security, right? They're sustainable, affordable, and they can deliver security. 30 seconds, please.
I can say is a fact. It's cheapest to be decentralized, is the one that is more resistant to shock. So renewable ensure resilience and also convenience on the market. But I wish to say in this 30 seconds that following what has been said by Secretary Kerry, we are feeding the initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations to concentrate on the G20 plus country. He will meet these countries in April. We'll prepare a report on that can really understand what are the responsibilities of what this country can do in behalf of the entire world. And my last word is on when we talk about technological neutrality and mixed technology. I wish to make my point that the most important variable in fighting climate change is time. Because the physics of climate change cannot allow us to do later what we have to do now. Yeah. And if we have to reduce 43%, as the IPCC is requesting, emission by 2030, the only technology that is available in time and scale is renewables.
Thanks. Yeah, climate doesn't wait for our political machinations here. Just so I don't get the organizers out of whack, but the Secretary whispered at me and says, I'd like to get 30 seconds on Trump. I tried to entice you at the front end of this conversation. If you could do Trump in 30 seconds,
I apologize. I got carried
chapeau and tap my hat, and then we have to wrap.
I now have something in my eye, which is bugging me.
That I can't solve.
Just very quickly on Trump for everybody. When Trump came in last time, he moved out of the Paris Agreement. And despite his not being in the Paris Agreement, 75% of the new electricity that came online during the Trump administration came from renewables. Yeah. And the IRA, which has been an enormous kickstart on batteries and other things we're doing, the IRA, 85% of the money is going to so-called red states. So I don't see a lot of my former colleagues in the Senate, Republicans, going in and saying, hey, kill the jobs we created in our state. Get rid of that factory. I don't think that's going to happen. Moreover, and most importantly, during the Trump administration, the governors of our 50 states, 37 of them had renewable portfolio laws and still do, and they followed the law. And so they all continued to do what they were doing. And we had a movement in America called We're Still In. And if next Monday Donald Trump pulls out of the agreement, I promise you, all those governors and all those mayors, over 1,000 mayors, are going to stand up and say, we're still in. So Donald Trump may pull out, but America is going to stay in what it's doing. And I think it's important for people to understand that.
It's an important last word. If I think I have the math correct, Secretary, it's $100 billion deployed under the IRA in the first 2 years, which is extraordinary in terms of business development for the states
alone.
And
the belief is that it's a tax credit. So it's whatever company applies for it and is qualified for it gets the tax credit. Yeah. And they estimate that it could go up well over several billions of dollars.
Yep. Great. Nice to see you all. I wanted to thank our organizers for the extra time. What a great panel. Secretary Kerry, Lord Turner, Rachel Kyte, Professor, nice to see you again. DG, I was only in jest, in case I have some people say, why'd you call him His Highness? That was in jest. The Director General of ARENA, thanks very much. Can you give him a nice round of applause? Thank you very much.